Hey everybody, my name is Danny Lappin, and today I'm going to be talking about planning for a changing climate. Wanted to thank everybody for joining me this fine evening. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to go on this journey with me. So we have four main objectives for today's presentation. The first being, I want you all to have fun. Second, I'd like you guys to learn something. And number three, I'd like you to understand why planning for climate change is important, not just from a theoretical sense, but from a more quantitative and practical sense. And number four, I want you to understand how to utilize New York State's Climate Smart Communities program to plan for a changing climate. So here's how the presentation is going to break down. I'm first going to give you a little bit of an introduction to OCCA, who we are and what we do. I'm going to do a quick run through on climate change, the basic science behind climate change, why it's an issue, so on and so forth. Then I'm going to transition into an overview of the Climate Smart Communities program. And then I'm going to explain how your town can utilize the Climate Smart Communities program to plan for a changing climate. OCCA is a 501c3 nonprofit environmental conservation organization located 7.5 miles up Otsego Lake in the town of Springfield. We have 3 full-time staff and 4 part-time staff. We have 3 program areas: education and outreach. Think of your school-based events, our lecture series. We have research and monitoring. So for that program, you would imagine our citizen science stream monitoring program and invasive species control program. And finally, there's my area, policy and planning, which focuses on state and federal level environmental policy development and implementation, and environmental planning, which focuses on town planning, anything from ranging from town planning to transportation planning to zoning and everywhere in between, kind of a jack of all trades, so to speak. So as I said before, I'm the environmental planner with the Otsego County Conservation Association. I also happen to be nationally certified by the American Planning Association. I received that designation in 2019. I was originally hired in 2014, fresh out of graduate school. So I'm very thankful to OCCA for giving me the opportunity to dip my foot into the planning field. I received my master's degree in environmental policy from Bard College in the Hudson Valley and my Bachelor of Science degree in environmental science with an emphasis on social science from the University of California at Riverside. So, OCCA wears many hats. As I described before, this picture kind of puts into context what we're doing. In the upper left image, you see one of our former interns, Mary, picking water chestnuts out of Silver Lake, I believe, which is located on the border between Chenango and Otsego counties. In the middle, you see our program director, Jeff O'Hanley, educating elementary school students about different tree species in the village of Cooperstown. And in the upper right, you see me delivering a presentation to town officials about conserving the Butternut Creek watershed located right here in Otsego County. So now I wanted to kind of give you a quick overview of climate change. Many of you have probably heard that the terms climate change and global warming used interchangeably. In fact, they're really different things. Climate change refers to the broad change of global phenomena caused predominantly by burning fossil fuels, whereas global warming refers to the long-term warming of the planet since the early 20th century due to the increased amount of fossil fuel emissions since the Industrial Revolution. So they're different. Climate change is a much broader term, and global warming is more specifically focused on the increase in average global temperature since the early 20th century. In the image on the right, you'll notice a graphic here which kind of puts us into context. You see 2 scenarios kind of going over what the average change in temperature could look like in the United States under 2 different emission scenarios. And each scenario kind of encapsulates a different level of energy, amount of energy forced through the atmosphere, which would affect the amount of greenhouse gases being trapped within our atmosphere, and as a result, the amount of warming we can expect. So those are called representative concentration pathways. So under the lower scenario, we see about a 3 to 4 degree increase in Fahrenheit over the next century or so. Whereas in the far right scenario, you see a much more drastic increase of 7 to 8 degrees under the highest scenario by the end of the century. What does this mean? This means that there's going to be a fundamental shift in our climate over the next 100 years that could dramatically affect where we place our cities, where we build our roads, how long we live, what diseases may make their way up here, and thus requires a much more comprehensive approach to planning than we've traditionally embarked upon in the past. So another topic I wanted to touch on was the difference between climate adaptation and climate mitigation. Well, a lot of politicians that you come across during election season will talk about we need to fight climate change. And fighting climate change is a two-front battle. The first being you want to mitigate the effects of climate change by reducing the flow of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. For example, many of you are familiar with the amount of farms we have in Otsego County. Many of these farms practice a form of agriculture called regenerative ag. Regenerative agriculture focuses on improving soil quality through constant planting and topsoil regeneration. The co-benefit of this is an increased amount of carbon, which is sequestered by the plants and brought down into the soil root system. So this is a very important strategy to mitigate the amount of greenhouse gases we are emitting. On the other hand, adaptation, as you see in the image above, you see a cityscape where there is a river and you see a significant amount of man-made alterations to it. The reason for this is the community leaders in this area wanted to protect against flood. And they did so by balancing green infrastructure, as you'll see from the pervious surfaces, the buffer along one side of the stream, and armoring techniques where you'll see in the form of a flood wall and other infrastructure designed to channelize the river flow. So that is adaptation, and more colloquially, we can think of adaptation as people assuming that climate change is going to happen, that we're going to see increased in sea levels and other rain events, and we need to adapt our built environment to accommodate these changes. So climate change, unfortunately, in this world has become a politicized topic. Some of you may have the following misconceptions, or may have heard the following misconceptions about climate change. And in order to make this presentation productive, I wish to dispel a few of these myths. The first being is that humans aren't involved. As you'll see, the Intergovernmental Panels on Climate Change finds it extremely likely that humans are responsible for the increase in global warming. In science, nothing is ever certain, but the closest you'll come is a governing body or a scientific body saying it's extremely likely that humans are responsible for the climate change, or that gravity exists, or that the earth is round, so on and so forth. The next myth that you might hear is that climate change occurs in cycles. The global average temperature goes up, global average temperature goes down. And while that is true, there is some natural variability in the changes in our climate. The natural variability, however, cannot explain the magnitude of the change in global average temperatures. Finally, we've heard our candidate for president suggest that climate change went on a hiatus. What about global cooling? When you see a cold day, people say, oh, so much for global warming. And people laugh, but in this case, it's a normalization of another common myth, which is that climate change went on a hiatus. And while the increase in average temperatures have slowed over the past decade, long-term temperature trends have not slowed at all. And so in the image on the right, you'll see that a graph showing the different influences on global average temperatures from natural sources, and then from all human influences, and then a combination of the two. And you'll notice that the natural sources of climate change don't nearly account for the average increase in global temperature as much as the human contribution to climate change drives the increase in global average temperature. So normalizing the two, you see that steep upward curve that Al Gore made famous in his film An Inconvenient Truth. And so some of you might ask, why should we focus on climate when we're planning? We need to create jobs, we need to provide housing. We need to make sure that there's food on people's tables, that the kids can go to school effectively and without trouble, that our transportation system runs efficiently. All of those systems are dependent on a stable climate. Climate is the underlying bedrock of our continued longevity as a species. So to put this into context, why is it important? This figure on the right kind of will demonstrate this. Between 1980 and 2019, there have been an average of 6.6 natural disasters per year in the United States with $1 billion or more in damages. Okay, so then 39 years, you've seen about 7 natural disasters with 1 billion or more in property damage. In 2020 alone, there have been 16 natural disasters, each causing more than $1 billion in damages. And this is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And you'll see in the graph on the right, it has different types of disasters which are color-coded, but you'll notice the trend line in black, which shows that the increase in average cost per event is going up. And that is startling, especially when we realize that our entire federal budget is somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 trillion. So if all of these communities are having major natural disasters, if natural disasters are becoming more costly, it's going to take all of us, all the way from the town council to the federal government, to work together in planning a more resilient future. And so to put that figure in the previous slide into a little bit more context, I wanted to focus on 3 major natural disasters which happened over the past 3 years. The first being the derecho, which is essentially a land hurricane, which flattened the state of Iowa and parts of Illinois and its neighboring states, and caused 4 deaths and about $7.5 billion in damage. And this was a weather phenomenon which is not common. It's very uncommon and very unlikely, but it hit an area of the United States which is very seasonally reliant on agriculture. And it dramatically impacted the state of Iowa's agriculture production and corn harvest, for instance. And so the damage that this causes, not just the $7.5 billion in property damage, it's actually the sustained economic damage from losing a large portion of your crops. A more disastrous event, Hurricane Harvey, which occurred in 2018 and sadly killed 89 people, it was in the city of Houston, Texas, which had notoriously developed along its riparian areas and right along its riverfronts. And the resulting deluge of rain that fell over this period of days in Houston caused those rivers to jump their banks and inundate a large portion of the city. And this caused $131.9 billion in damage. And one point I wanted to focus on for Hurricane Harvey is that the city's development pattern in turn led to an increased amount of damage coming from the flooding that Hurricane Harvey unfortunately brought. The third event actually hit my home state of California. It was the West Coast wildfires, which affected Washington, Oregon, and California, causing 41 deaths, and the damage has yet to be tabulated. There's an interesting website on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's website, which kind of goes into this. From a planning perspective, you see a lot of these communities being built in areas that are severely prone to wildfire. And some of you might ask, well, why do people do that? Again, it comes down to planning. And so why focus on climate? Kind of tying it all together conceptually, peoples build and design their cities and systems based on past climate conditions and their range of variability. Addressing climate change also does not fall in the purview of any one governing entity. The town you may live in may have an active approach to addressing climate change, whereas your neighboring town might not think it's that much of an issue. Unfortunately, the climate will change irrespective of what either town does, because climate change requires planning on a global scale. Vulnerable populations such as the elderly, communities of color, and children are most at risk from the effects of climate change. So these are populations that towns really focus on protecting every day. And in order to fully do so going forward, climate must enter into the planning fabric of each community in our state and in the world. And so, if climate change is such a major issue, then why is acting on it so hard? The answer to that theoretically can be, contextualized by the tragedy of the commons, which was a 19th century economic theory, which posited that when a common resource such as the earth is made available for use by humans to enjoy its natural resources, each human will act in their own individual interest and thus deprive the greater whole of an efficient, fair allocation of the resources so that everyone may survive. And in the case of climate change, this is all too true. So often we hear that other countries are not meeting their climate obligations under various international treaties, and that's used as a defense to avoid meeting our own, climate emissions targets nationally. And so this kind of issue plays out on the global political stage, making it very difficult to have this sustained, long-term, century-long approach to addressing climate change. Climate change, again, does not adhere to societal boundaries. And nor is it fair economically. Some countries who are older and who have a longer time to develop, are more comfortable of meeting clear climate obligations than countries who are in the process of developing and have not had that much time to grow their economies. So think about India and China, for instance, compared to the United States or Europe. Political terms are also not conducive to long-term action. In the United States, presidential term is 4 years. The terms of senators are also 4 years, I believe, and the or no, 6 years, I think. I don't know. But the in the town level, the political term is between 2 and 4 years, and these terms again are not conducive to long-term action. You could have one governing regime very committed to climate action, and another one to come along subsequently and turn it all on its head. And the people's perception of climate also does, affects how governing bodies who represent the people address climate change. So in Otsego County, 72% of residents believe that global warming is happening, whereas 56% of Otsego County residents who believe that global warming is harming residents of the United States. And so you see here that almost 30% of Otsego County residents don't believe that global warming is happening. And an even lower percentage believe that it's actually harming the residents of the United States. And this kind of keys into the level in which our nation as a whole is prioritizing or perceives climate change as being a major threat. And so where are we right now? As of October 15, the global carbon dioxide concentration is at 411.05 parts per million. And the last time we had a comparable level of CO2 concentration, the Earth was 3 to 4 degrees centigrade warmer. And this reading is taken from the Mauna Loa Mauna Loa Observatory in the state of Hawaii. I believe it's run by the Scripps Oceanic Institute, which is part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And so moving on to the state level, why should we be taking climate change seriously? Well, based on the varying levels of scenarios and different scenarios, you'll see that the projected increase in average annual temperature ranges from 2 to 3.4 degrees by the early 2020s, and then goes to 5.3 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the 2080s. And that will substantially affect industries like agriculture, outdoor recreation, tourism. It'll affect our urban communities in terms of heat-induced illnesses, in terms of water supply, for instance, earlier stream flow events, messing up kind of your water supply patterns for the upstates, these smaller cities. And then on top of that, we're anticipating to see a projected increase in the average annual precipitation throughout the state, again, ranging from 1 to 8% by the 2020s, and then going up to 10.1% increase by the 2080s. And I believe that this figure refers to kind of a step increase. So once the 1 to 8% increase is achieved, the next time period, it'll increase 3 to 12% beyond that, and so on and so forth. And one thing to remember when considering climate change in New York is that seasons impact rural areas. So for instance, the amount of money that the outdoor recreation economy contributes to the Northeast is $150 billion per year. And that industry employs 1 million people in the Northeast. And even more granular, there are 44,500 jobs in the winter recreation industry that are at risk from the ski season and winter season ending earlier than it should. This industry generates about $2.6 to $2.7 billion per year in revenue. The figure on the left kind of puts this into context. The figure shows the timing of the snow melt stream flow events, and an increase in average temperature of 1.6 degrees between 1940 and 2014 increased the earlier stream flow timing from, I guess, snowmelt, that is snowmelt related, by 7.7 days. And you see that there are many areas in which measurements were taken in which the stream flow timing, um, became 10 days earlier than it should be. And that essentially means that the snow that is accumulated over the winter is melting earlier and running down our rivers and streams earlier. This affects everything ranging from agriculture to our natural ecosystems in the Northeast. And again, it has dire economic consequences for those individuals who rely on water flowing at a certain time, at a certain amount, at a certain, until a certain date. The water is flowing earlier will force people to change their growing seasons and will force the outdoor industry to dramatically change how they operate over the next 50 years or so. And so New York has a panoply of approaches to addressing climate change. But for the sake of today's presentation, I want to focus on the Climate Smart Communities program. Under the Patterson administration, Governor Patterson put forward Executive Order 24, which called for an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. This kind of bore out New York State's, one of nation-leading approach to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So in New York, we have some specific challenges, and I kind of wanted to put these challenges into the context of the Climate Smart Communities program, because achieving some of these recommendations and actions may seem easier than they actually are. The first challenge that we face is that New York is a home rule state, meaning that each municipality can choose to regulate land use and pass laws and adopt budgets as they see fit. Not every community in New York State will be required to address climate change. Rather, each one will have to do so voluntarily, or if they decide to pass a law, that is on their own prerogative. Municipalities are also constrained in how they raise revenue. Much of the state is subject to a 2% tax cap, meaning that the tax levy that a town imposes or a village imposes cannot be raised by more than 2% year over year. This constrains an already tight municipal budgets and makes it difficult for local governments to raise the revenue to address climate change, and thus makes them more reliant on grants. The more communities that are relying on grants, the more competitive the grant proposals become. And also, it's important to remember that the technical ability to implement climate resilience planning varies significantly across the state. You're not going to have engineers and planners and climate scientists in every single community or in every single region. Rather, communities will have to band together and bring people and train themselves to be able to implement climate adaptation techniques in their community. And so I wanted to give a quick overview of the Climate Smart Communities program. In New York State, as of 2020, 313 communities have registered in the Climate Smart Communities program. 8.7 million people in our state live in registered climate smart communities, and over 2,000 actions have been completed. Actions range from incorporating more renewable energy into your municipal portfolio to educating the public about climate change. I gave a talk at the Huntington Memorial Library in Oneonta about a year ago, and this number was significantly smaller. I believe that only 849 actions had been completed, and just over 200 communities had registered in the Climate Smart Communities program. So it's very heartening to see the increase in awareness of the program, and it's a testament to how this program can be a good vehicle for planning moving forward. So the program was established originally in 2009. It was a 6-agency initiative comprising of the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of Health, the Department of State, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, the Department of Public Service, and the New York State Department of Transportation. The certification program was launched on Earth Day 2014, with the intention being that it's broadly applicable, easy to get involved, it rewards positive behavior through the allocation of grants, and it encourages long-term ongoing action by that positive feedback loop of more actions being implemented and more grants coming to your respective community, and so on and so forth. This Climate Smart Communities program is a great vehicle for planning, in my opinion, and really for 4 reasons. The The first being that it makes your municipality competitive for some state funding programs. But in reality, it will allow your community to score higher on projects ranging from infrastructure projects like water treatment plant upgrades, road maintenance, to grants for improving your sidewalks, installing bike lanes, improving building facades, energy efficiency, municipal energy efficiency programs. And it also provides a robust framework of resources to help organize you to take climate action. Many citizen committees may be very enthusiastic about taking on climate change, but may not know where to start. The Climate Smart Communities program has a plethora of resources which helps you understand how to achieve each action that can get you certification points. And the website also provides you of towns who have taken approaches to implement some of the practices you might be interested in doing. So it really gives you a good reference point to get started. Ultimately, implementing several climate adaptation and mitigation techniques will save your community's money through greater efficiencies. For example, right-sizing your culverts to accommodate 100-year, 500-year storms will save you money when those big storms come in and you don't have to replace that culvert that got washed out. That's a really kind of cut and dry, clear example of cost savings from smart planning and integrating climate adaptation techniques into your day-to-day work. The next reason is it reduces the future flood risk. If you're taking action to restore your rivers and streams to their natural floodplains and plant green infrastructure and incorporate engineering techniques to reduce flood risk, you're saving your community millions of dollars on the back end in the event of a major flood or a disaster. So think Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Lee, all of those events, the implementation of flood reduction techniques who have been proven to dramatically reduce the amount of financial damage incurred by these large-scale weather events. And so if you're interested in becoming certified, the first step is to contact OCCA. Through the tireless work of our executive director, Amy Wyant, we received funding to help communities throughout the Mohawk Valley region embark on their climate smart community certification journey. And if you're interested, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is found later in this presentation. The next step would be to pass this Climate Smart Communities Pledge. This is essentially a verbal commitment from your municipality that it will take action on climate change. And the pledge must be passed verbatim in order to be acceptable for the state. The third step is to create a account on the DEC's Climate Smart Communities portal and set up a Climate Smart Communities task force and committee. And finally, you'd be ready to start implementing some actions. And then kind of when you're becoming certified, you'll notice that there are things called mandatory actions and priority actions. Mandatory actions involve the creation of the Climate Smart Communities Task Force and the appointment of the Climate Smart Communities Coordinator. These actions are mandatory because you need this kind of setup in order to provide a sense of organization and focus to the group of people you've now just appointed to take on climate change in your area. Priority actions are much more free range, however. They range from educating the community about the effects of climate change in schools, public events, through murals, art, what have you, to conducting energy audits of all your government buildings and many things in between, as we'll see in just a little bit. And so kind of, I wanted to launch into some important tips about creating your Climate Smart Communities Task Force. The image above is the village of Saranac Lake in Franklin County. This is an image of their task force hard at work. It's important to create a diverse task force whose members are not already overburdened. In many areas, people who are involved in the community often wear 5 or 6 hats, and many of whom may not share the same views on climate. They may not share the same views on town government. They may not share the same views on the role of government in addressing climate change. However, in order to get a far-reaching and thorough analysis accomplished on any planning project, you really need that diverse set of people to take on a project of this magnitude. And it's important, in these meetings are more of a marathon as opposed to a sprint. So you're not just going to convene a meeting and take on one project. You're going to be accomplishing many projects over a long period of time. So you need people who are able to make that time commitment work and have that long-term dedication to stay committed to the task force. This requires political support and community support, which transcend election terms and election cycles. It's also important to avoid paralysis by analysis. You know, one of the most important phrases I can share is to just get started. If your task force is stuck kind of figuring out what to do, pick a low-hanging fruit item and just get started doing it. That's kind of the easiest way to get moving on this this program, and the positive reinforcement provided by the DEC and provided by us, if you happen to work with us, will hopefully keep you going. And another thing to remember is implementing actions that address climate change are not as foreign a concept as you might think. In fact, a lot of the activities that your town may or may not be doing could be eligible for points under the Climate Smart Communities program. And the towns I discussed later in this presentation will kind of show you what that looks like. And so when you get started, it's important to hit the low-hanging fruit first. You want to get those big wins to show the value of the Climate Smart Communities Task Force to your town board or village board of trustees. The newly formed Climate Smart Communities Task Force should figure out what eligible actions are already taking place on day one. You know, this involves, figuring out what are we already doing that's eligible for points, and how do we document our activities for approval by the state. For example, OCCA and the Otsego County Soil and Water Conservation District and many other partners like the Butternut Valley Alliance partnered to assess the physical conditions of the Butternut Creek in, I think, 2018, 2019. And that assessment being completed actually makes the municipalities within the watershed eligible for points under the Climate Smart Communities program. That was already done. It was funded by a grant. The municipalities didn't have to expend too much effort, and yet they can all log it in with the DEC and say, hey, we've done this assessment of our watershed. We understand what our threats are and what needs to be done. And the DEC will award you points toward your Climate Smart Communities certification. And in fact, the Butternut communities in the Butternut Creek watershed are in fact eligible for more points because OCCA is working on another watershed assessment and management plan, which is slated to be completed in 2021.
And just to work off of Danny's point for that, with the municipalities, it is important to connect with either ourselves or with the Clean Energy Community Coordinator for the Mohawk Valley. She will probably still have you come over to work with OCCA, but knowing what's going on, it's much easier to when you're working with a coordinator to help you. And what we do with any community who's interested is that the absolute focus on looking at what the community is already doing. So we sit down and do a full look through the program. Usually takes about an hour, hour and a half with your task force to see what actions you've already completed, what actions are already underway, and how many points you have towards your certification. So I just wanted to pop that in while we're in this section. So thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Amy. That's a great point to remember. So again, if you've done that self-assessment, you're really not sure what to do or how to do it, the Climate Smart Communities website has tons of tips and resources on how to get your certification item accomplished and where to learn more about it. In fact, you'll see in this example below, the restoration of floodplains and riparian buffers, a lot of this action are already being done by our respective soil and water conservation district. If you're interested in logging for points for this action, the Climate Smart Communities webpage has a series of kind of tips and information and Q&A that can help your town board wrap its head around why this action is important, how much it's going to cost, and who's going to do it. All very common questions that any elected official will ask when faced with a prospective project. And this website is an invaluable resource to use. And if you don't have fast internet or you don't have internet at town hall, you can get the PDF or print it out with one simple click and then bring it to your town board meetings or your village board of trustees meetings. And so I kind of wanted to, rather than talk theoretically about climate action planning or climate adaptation planning, I wanted to provide a couple of examples of municipalities who I believe have taken significant action in addressing climate change within their boundaries. So the first community I wanted to focus on is Saranac Lake in Franklin County, New York. It's a population of about 1,500 people, so similar in size to many of our towns in Otsego County. They created their Climate Smart Communities Task Force in 2018 and achieved their bronze certification on September 24, 2020. So Saranac, to Amy's point previously, Saranac Lake used its existing 2016 zoning code to get climate smart community certification points. You're like, well, how did that happen? How could a code from 2016 get climate smart community certification points? Well, in fact, a lot of the certification points and criterion are designed to incorporate smart growth and environmentally friendly principles into their certification criteria. So in the case of this code, their code contained numerous smart growth principles, such as promoting compact development, as you see in the image above you, and encouraging walkability throughout the community through the installation of sidewalks, installation of traffic calming techniques and measures, and so on and so forth. The Climate Smart Communities Task Force evaluated the existing code and found, in fact, that many principles that the DEC is looking for from a climate smart community are already there. So there was very little additional resources that had to be expended on the village's part to get points through this action. The next kind of thing that they did this is one example of many, is they used a completed 2013 bicycle and pedestrian trail master plan to obtain certification points. And to get more points beyond that, they started implementing the plan that they had adopted. So by adding many bike racks to several locations throughout the town, such as in Riverside Park and elsewhere. They also utilized ongoing sidewalk projects, which were part of the city's capital improvement plan and planned streetscape improvements as well, to obtain certification points. So in this particular instance, your local highway superintendent may be unwittingly implementing several actions which are eligible for points under the Climate Smart Communities program. They may not even know it. So if you're going to form a committee or a task force for the Climate Smart Communities program, please get your highway superintendent or your deputy highway superintendent on that committee. The chances are they could earn you several points with things that they're already doing day to day. And so the next town I wanted to focus on is the town of Hamilton, and this is in Madison County, our neighbor to the northwest. The population of Hamilton is about 4,239. It's slightly bigger than Cooperstown, slightly smaller than Oneonta. So I figured it'd be a good kind of example, or a comparable example. They achieved their Climate Smart Community certification on May 28th of this year. And so in Hamilton, they decided to set up a task force with that diverse group of stakeholders, which I mentioned before. You have town board members, so many of whom are very passionate about taking action on climate change, business leaders, faculty members from Colgate University, and community members. And this was intended to get a diverse subset of people who are interested in climate action in the town of Hamilton, who may have different perspectives and different knowledge sets. And they wanted to do this to encourage kind of a far-reaching, broad plan that took effective climate action. And again, this task force looked at what has already been done. They utilized a recent comprehensive plan update with several sustainability elements to demonstrate how it incorporated smart growth and climate resiliency into the town's day-to-day activities. The task force had to go through the plan page by page and outline each recommendation and priority action that documented this. But again, that diligence and that attention to detail netted them Climate Smart Communities certification points, again, without the significant expenditure of resources. The town of Hamilton also partnered with a group of Colgate University students to conduct a climate vulnerability assessment. These assessments weigh the risk climate change poses to your key town assets, such as your local university. So in Oneonta, SUNY Oneonta, Hamilton, your agricultural community, and your town's physical infrastructure. And The project was led by a faculty member from Colgate University, and this was a great way to get students involved in working with the town to plan for its future. This is a way to get students interested in the town's future, maybe encourage them to live and work in the town, but also to have a stake in ensuring that the town is well prepared to take on the risks of extreme weather events. So in this particular project, the group of students created a table showing, with each, natural disaster hazard like freezes, extreme wind, extreme rain, extreme high temperatures, and extreme low temperatures, for instance. And they evaluated Hamilton's relative risk on a low, medium, high basis, and provided that data to the town board so that they can make planning decisions based on that information. And so the next, and kind of one of the more basic things that the town of Hamilton did, but in my opinion, one of the most important things that any community can do is to conduct a self-assessment of the town's risk to climate hazards. And in Otsego County, we kind of did this already. Otsego County had each municipality participating in the program self-assess its own ability to respond to a natural disaster and to pay for the damages that each natural disaster incurs. This self-assessment is kind of similar. The DEC Office of Climate Change has an easy to use Excel spreadsheet which can help you analyze the risk climate change poses to your town. And to get this done, the town analyzed existing plans and outlined approaches to addressing key climate hazards facing the town. And this, again, helps the town prioritize which climate smart communities actions to take, as opposed to just kind of throwing the kitchen sink and saying we'll go after all of them. This allowed them to kind of dovetail existing efforts to protect the town and funnel state funds into projects which address their most vulnerable areas and assets. And so moving forward, discussing resources for climate resilience planning, New York State has a one-stop shop for all matters related to climate change. It's nyclimatescience.org. It has maps, it has data, and it has documents which allow you to really get a key understanding of sorry about that. It has all these kind of visuals and resources to help you understand how climate change will affect your respective community. And it also has a lot of data which will help you make informed science-based arguments to your elected officials who you're asking to take action or who may be on your task force and may be a little bit unsure on where to go next. The other, on the federal scale, the Environmental Protection Agency has a great program called ARC-X, and this program provides technical assistance and tons of information based on region and area of interest for you to for your town to kind of digest and utilize to your own perspective. One of the most important things that I can recommend is that you can click on the Northeast region as you see above, and you can kind of figure out, what kind of climate challenge are you interested in addressing? Anywhere from flooding to water quality to water supply. And you can see other municipalities in the Northeast who have addressed these challenges. And you can also contact the EPA's program administrators for this area, and they will be willing to provide you technical assistance. And so I really encourage you to reach out to them. In fact, there was a recent webinar that I was on in which the director of the ARC-X program came to speak, and they suggested, again, they said, please reach out, we're here to help. And so another kind of more broad resource is the US Global Change Research Program. This is a conglomeration of data gathered from 13 federal agencies who are responsible for complying with the Global Change Act of 1990. They coordinate the preparation of detailed reports on climate change, which is the 4th National Climate Assessment, and they provide a whole panoply of tools to help communities understand how climate change will affect them. The link to this website is below, toolkit.climate.gov. Again, this really helps. This provides visuals, graphs, models for anybody to use to address climate change in their community. So this avoids you having to pay an expensive consulting firm, thousands of dollars to do the same thing and go on the same website and use the same tools. This will help you navigate the Climate Smart Communities program even more effectively than before. And so if you're interested in moving forward, the first step would be to contact the DEC Office of Climate Change at climatesmart@dec.ny.gov, and then to contact us. You have our executive director, Amy Wyans' contact information below, and then here's my contact information is beneath that. Please feel free to shoot us an email anytime. We will be sure to get back to you as quickly as we can. OCCA also offers a Circuit Rider Planner program, which can help your communities implement the actions necessary to achieve those Climate Smart Communities certification points. We assist communities with many things related to planning, ranging from environmental planning efforts such as greenhouse gas inventories to zoning code revisions and comprehensive plan preparation. The OCCA takes on 50% of project costs, with the town being liable for only 50% of the overall cost of a project. We also offer numerous trainings ranging from ag and farmland protection planning to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act and beyond. So if you're interested, we have several of these presentations up on our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube, you can click on, search for OCCA, and you'll find several of our presentations on planning. And please remember to like and subscribe. That really helps us get more traction within YouTube's all-powerful algorithm. And so with that said, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, I thank you for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to attend this presentation.
I'm here to answer any questions as well. And even if you're not sure or have questions specifically about if Climate Smart Communities is something that your municipality should pursue or how to go about that, if you're not necessarily part of the municipality but want to help kind of spear this ahead, or I'm doing really great. Spearhead this, there we go, in your community, please let us know. All right, we've got a few in the chat here. Thank you, Trish. Danny always does a great job. Maureen, some of the local municipalities who are actually underway with Climate Smart Communities, there is a very interesting program that we just got started right before COVID hit, and we are actually, we're figuring out, we're figuring out the funding and have finally gotten it all squared away. But there is 13 municipalities with, or actually 12 municipalities and the county themselves of Otsego County are all pursuing Climate Smart Communities right now. So they all have decided to do it, had taken the pledge, and have put together their task forces, as well as have their leaders. So they all have their coordinators in place, and they were all starting to work towards their certification. The program actually came together to have these communities actually work on it together. So we wanted to do it in a collaborative sort of way so that the municipalities would not have to go it alone. Because as Danny mentioned early on in the presentation, it can feel a bit overwhelming. It can feel like there's a lot going on when it comes to climate smart communities. And we thought that if we could work on it together, that might actually help a lot of the communities make those steps, and including the county in that process is going to allow us to make steps or to take things on a little bit quicker than we traditionally would be able to, because it's something that we can come together, figure out how to make it work. And as long as all the municipalities that are part of the Institute participate in one way, shape, or form, then they will also get those certification points for Climate Smart.
Yeah, and to build on that, the village of Cooperstown and the city of Oneonta have both taken the pledge and have their coordinators in place. And even the towns and village of the town of Richfield and the village of Richfield Springs have taken the pledge and are beginning to implement actions. And so there's a lot of activity going on. I think the most important thing to do is to remind each community who is embarking upon this journey. So the town of Middlefield, I can look into that for you. I don't know off the top of my head. Amy, do you know?
As of right now, Middlefield has not connected directly with us. So if they are going about it, they are working on their own, but we would love to help them if they are interested. And if you are, like you said, it's your town and it's where you live, if you're interested, then that actually helps us a lot when we reach out. We can say that we had some of their constituents actually join us on a webinar and thought that it might be something that we should at least reach out to. So we'd love to do that if they are working on their own, Maureen.
Yeah, and and then it's important, for Middlefield, if they're going to be working on a comprehensive plan update, that's a really great opportunity to get tons of points in the Climate Smart Communities program and actually make the town much more competitive for grant funding for, again, everything ranging from highway projects to other sustainability projects throughout Middlefield. Thank you, Susan O'Hanley. Thank you. Yeah, we're happy. Amy and I are both happy to provide any help we can to get, to help with your DOAS's Climate Action Leadership Program. And
absolutely.
And Maureen, thank you. It is valuable, to help our world and protect our natural environment. And these programs make sense. A lot of the actions many of these climate smart communities have taken represent small investments, not multi-million-dollar projects. These are things that the towns are already doing, and the state is attempting to reward good behavior with more money. So,
sorry, Danny, just a few of the things that Danny did not go into, because he was going into the actual program itself and how it can be very helpful. But one of the other pieces just to know is that the program itself, becoming a climate smart community or even starting to work towards climate smart community, does give you extra points during some competitive grant applications that, and there are separate pots of money that are set aside just through the DEC just for climate smart projects. It also helps with clean energy communities as another form of potential grant funds that are out there. So these programs not only are rewarding for good behavior and getting recognition for this, being on the forefront of this, but there are some monetary things, and not only are they small monetary investments to take the actions, many of them are cost positive. So taking some of these actions, like switching over to LED streetlights, is depending on how your program works and how you go about it. Many communities are seeing somewhere between 40 and 80% savings in one of their largest bills that they have. So LED streetlights is a huge action that is so positive for the municipality's bank account, as well as for a lot of other elements, making it much easier to see at night, and actually doing a lot of positive. So many of these things are just that. They have got multiple positives.
Yeah, and a lot of these actions are voluntary. They're not regulatory, and so this is very easy to get widespread adoption and support from members of your community. Largely because this is not seen as government overreach. This is basically seen as being able to bring in more revenue to your municipality's bottom line.
Absolutely. When speaking with the DEC, because there was a very specific question actually asked by Otsego County, if they are to take the pledge, does that mean that the DEC can come, like Danny said, and have regulatory oversight? But it does not. This is just a pledge to know that as a community, you are looking towards the future, looking towards taking that community into what's to come. And I always use the terrible pun of being able to weather that next storm. Collectively in all ways, shapes, and forms. But it does not mean that you're going to be restricted. So even if along the way, for whatever reason, economic development or otherwise, there was some sort of activity or some sort of expansion that someone wanted to do, it's not going to restrict them in that community from doing those types of things. It is just that collectively you are trying to move forward to be more cognizant of what's happening and being more resilient. Our communities need to be resilient as we move forward with climate change.
So are there any more questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you everybody for attending tonight's webinar. The full recording will be put up on our YouTube channel. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment in the comment section. Thanks everybody. Take care. Have a good night.
Have a wonderful night, everyone.